tumefika mbali sana.
Yani kila wakati najikuta na kuwa mgeni. Yes. Yes. Si ndio nasikika? Haya. Okay, welcome back from the break to both of you in the room and also those of you who are online. And now we will be moving on to the policy brief for the forestry subproject of the NEPSIS. And here, as Stefano started off by saying, you've all received a policy brief draft for forestry, so we're really keen to get your input here in terms of how we can finalize this policy brief. And I'll be, again, like Dan, I'll be holding up a little sheet when you're close to finishing time. We have set aside a good chunk of time here for discussion, so even though we've cut a little bit into this session, I think we'll be okay with time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mette. So, in brief outline, I want to, Pili and I will be sharing some of the context of the policy brief, an outline of our findings, and then the recommendations that we're drawing from the policy brief. And I want to reiterate that any and every form of feedback is welcome. You could even tell us to go back to the drawing board and start again, and we would do so. We wouldn't do so happily, but we would do so because it was necessary. So please do not hold back in any feedback in the policy brief, particularly the coastal and the wildlife policy briefs, because they're the ones which need the most work. This one's all right, actually. But just to explain the context, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that the challenge with respect to natural resource management, which underpins the whole basis of the project, is this question of how efficient and how sustainable can top-down, state-led conservation and management of natural resources be? Because it faces two fundamental challenges, two fundamental dilemmas. The first is that the benefits from the management and use of these natural resources tend not to be enjoyed locally, whereas the costs are felt locally. We'll see this particularly in wildlife, but with respect to forestry, the income that could be generated through charcoal, through timber, goes up to central government, and not enough of it stays at the village level. And the second, whereas the costs of not being able to farm, of being fined if you go into the forest, those are experienced locally. And the second challenge is that the rules for determining fair and proper forest use are also not determined locally. They are received from above. Now this, we all know, we should be highly familiar with it. I want to put a word of doubt, a word of caution to that simplistic framework, because I know that the reason why people love trees in Tanzania is not just because of the benefits they may get from timber or charcoal. Where my wife lives in Hanang, there are farmers nearby amongst our neighbours who keep plots of trees on their land because trees are important to them. Nani miti asili, it's the original, it's indigenous trees that, in addition to the grevillea and everything else which people are planting, there are also people who want to have trees on their land. So we have to be cautious about a narrow economistic framework in looking at forestry changes, but we also have to recognize the importance of participation, kushirikishwa, the importance of being part of the management of forests. And there are two ways in which the Tanzanian forest policy has responded to these challenges. The first is through joint forest management, and the second is community-based forest management. And the difference is quite important in that in joint forest management, the forests are not found on village lands. Rather, the villages are adjacent to the forests, and the villagers are allowed to take part in the management of forests which are next to their land. I'm slightly nervous because there's there are experts in the room about forest management who might be correcting me on some of these points, and please do speak up, Matthew, if you hear anything which is not quite right on this. Community-based forest management refers to management of forests which are found on village lands. And one of the major changes that has happened in the last 5-10 years in Tanzania is the importance of village land forest reserves, which are new forest reserves established quite recently, which are entirely found within village lands, which are set up and managed and established by village authorities. And Abdallah, you were telling me that it was, I think, 46% of reserved forest now in Tanzania is found in village land forest reserves. So the question then, though, is how effective and how efficient are these new forms of managing forests? Because we know they should work in theory, but that's what economists say. If something works in theory, then it works. But I don't subscribe to that way of interpreting the world. We can come up with new theories of how forest management should work, because it is more participatory, because it involves local distribution of benefits, but we have to look at this empirically to see what actually happens. And this is what we want to share in the policy brief.
So this is just a repetition of what we presented earlier in the forest presentation. So just to skip this because it is the same, the study area and the studied villages. So I just moved to the next slide. Oh, sorry. No, no, this is the same. Sure. Yes, that is the same. Yes. So I just moved to this slide that talks about the CBFM in the Kilwa district, community-based forest management in the Kilwa district. Historically, CBFM was introduced by Danida in the 2000s and was locally known as UTUMI, that is Utunzaji wa Misitu project, that is conservation project. But later, local NGO took over when the Danida decided to focus at the national level on the national forestry strategy to use the fund at the national level. So Mpingo took over the project, and MCDI was collaborating with various actors, both at the national and international level. For instance, MCDI, Tanzania government, and also other local organizations such as Tanzania Forest Conservation Group, Mtumita, as have been elaborated earlier. MCDI is also involved in all CBFM projects in the Kilwa districts, and that is 14 villages which are under community-based forestry management. CBFM specifically aimed at achieving 3 objectives, that is to improve forest condition, livelihood, and forest governance. But it also emphasized on the participation of both men and women in the management activities. And this has also been supported by legal frameworks such as National Forest Policy, Forest Act, and the CBFM guideline, which all emphasized on the need to ensure that there is a balanced participation of men and women in forestry management projects. Multiple actors in the Kilwa districts have been involved to strengthen participation of women through the implementation of various interventions, such as gender awareness and economic empowerment programs. And also, there are some organizations that have been involved in providing training on energy-saving technology, for instance, WWF. These kind of interventions has helped to change the perceptions and the attitudes of men and women, for instance, on how men perceive women, and also on how women perceive themselves on their role in relation to forest. And they also help to improve the knowledge on the issue related to forest, and also increase the confidence and increase the voice, especially the voice of women who were mostly considered as marginalized before the implementation of community-based forestry management. So the increased participation of women in CBFM activities has been observed in, for instance, in meetings and also in management activities where more women are involved in forest activities such as forest patrol and forest protections, and also have seen the increase of women in village natural resource committees, where more women are holding the membership and the leadership position in the management committee. So all these have been because of presence of these multi-stakeholders partnerships, the presence of various actors that are involved in forestry conservation in the CBFM villages. No, the next slide, I can't find the same. So this is briefly about the findings of our policy brief, and it has been divided into 4. The first is on forest condition, improve the forest condition. The second is on forest governance, and the third is on the livelihood improvement, and the last one is on gender equity. And we have seen that the presence of a CBFM and in the CBFM villages has helped to improve forest conditions because of the implementation of various management activities at the village level. For instance, forest protections, forest patrols, rebanning. All these have helped to reduce the incidence of illegal activities in the CBFM villages. And also there's a rebanning, which is one of the ready initiatives that have been implemented in the CBFM villages, has reduced the incidence of forestry fire. And also the introduction of forest restrictions, such as fine and taxes, has reduced the rate of encroachment in the CBFM villages and also illegal activities. And you have also seen that there are some incentives that are provided to local communities, especially, for instance, when they report the issue of illegal activities in the forest. Some of them are paid 10% of the benefits from the confiscated products. So this is one of the incentives that motivate people to continue to conserve the forest, and also people to afraid to participate in illegal activities because they know that there are some fines and taxes that are taken. However, have seen that there is increase of encroachment in non-CBFM villages as compared to CBFM because of illegal activities that are continue to appear in non-CBFM villages. And you can see this picture is one of the pictures taken in one of the CBFM villages showing the forest condition has improved. I think that the tomorrow presentation where our colleagues who are going to present environmental outcomes will come more with the evidence of improved forest condition. Here is just the perceptions of local communities of how they perceive whether the forest condition has improved or not.
And just to back up what Pili was saying about the quality of the data with respect to forest condition, it was one of the joys and successes of this project was that we were able to collaborate with an up-and-coming new researcher called Kelvin Kamandi. And when I first met Kelvin, I must be honest, I wasn't sure what to make of his claims and his analysis, because this was a man who had a master's in GIS analysis and was proposing all sorts of extraordinary data analyses that could be done. And I thought, well, look, if you can do that, that's great, but you've got a master's program. You've got a master's in this work. And this sounds to me more like PhD work. But by good fortune, he was able to spend 3 months in a laboratory in Edinburgh University shortly after he joined the project. And this lab is run by a man called Casey Ryan, a wonderful researcher who's spent a lot of time researching in Tanzania and Mozambique. And it just happens to be the best place in the world, I think, to study changes in vegetation due to using radar data. And radar data are particularly good for the arid to semi-arid to subhumid vegetation types that you find in Tanzania. And to all of our astonishment and to Kelvin's great delight, in the course of 3 months, he undertook 3 major projects. He spent a lot of his time hanging out and working with not the PhD students in that lab, but with the postdocs. And one of the products, one only of the products of 3 months' work, in addition to all the work he was doing on irrigation, was a complete vegetation map of Tanzania, showing areas of afforestation, showing where the degradation of forest was taking place. And when I said, why aren't you showing afforestation as well, he had a good reason for that. It was to do with the techniques behind the radar analysis. So please look forward to the presentations on vegetation change when they come up tomorrow, because I think they provide fascinating, interesting and quite important findings. It was one of the successes of the project. I'm afraid none of that is in the policy brief. I've just been digressing.
Can I intervene also, Dan? The wonderful colleague that Dan is describing was supposed to be here, but he arrived sick from fieldwork in Kilwa. So we just got information this morning that he has been admitted at the university dispensary. So maybe he will be able to join, but maybe not. It's just to also, Dan, I wish you had the map that represents the change you described, because it's so powerful in explaining the change. Yeah.
Santitina. So please look forward to that. But as to get back to the policy brief, in addition to finding interesting, improved aspects of forest condition, as Pili's described, we've also found improved incidences of governance and natural resource governance in CBFM villages. Specifically, this means increased participation by community members in management plans and in the approving of rules and bylaws, which is crucial for bringing about the change of local participation in rules. We've also got the fact that village members are taking part in meetings which provide them with the access to the information that they need, including not just the forest management plans, but also other aspects of village development plans which hinge on forest products. We've got other forest conservation networks, such as the Community-Based Conservation Network of Tanzania, which has been involved in strengthening the village natural resource committees which are set up and providing them with training in good governance. And we must also recognise that the MCDI, as I hope you've picked up, is actually a focal organisation in helping to configure these partnerships. We have also found increased transparency, particularly with respect to the use of forest reserves from certified village forest reserves, but also pertaining to village council elections, management activities, and information relating to meetings, finance, elections of the natural resources committees. And further, over 50% of the people that we spoke to in these villages thought that the rules were fair and acceptable. So we have a good news story with respect to forest condition and a reasonably good news story with respect to governance, and the same good news story continues with livelihoods, because we found here that the villages are benefiting under community-based forest management. A majority have said their livelihoods have improved in the last 5 years, and 60% of them were saying that they had benefited from conservation knowledge or training opportunities and other income-generating activities. They recognise that villages are getting more income from selling certified resources, and that they are seeing improvements to the village infrastructure with respect to health services and medical insurance and water services. But there is a problem of elite capture, and most of the benefits are experienced at the community level rather than the local level. And over 60% of respondents said that they personally or as families had not benefited economically as a result of these changes, which is significant given that these are places where livelihoods are fundamentally determined by farming. And so where new products come in, like sesame, which require clearance of land and removal of forest, this produces a direct conflict between the presence of forest and then the foregoing of benefits which they could derive from farming.
There's also an evidence that the implementation of CBFM initiative has helped to implement various gender awareness programs, trainings, and also various economic empowerment programs, and also enforcement of gender inclusive policies that aim at empowering women and men to participate more actively in conservation activities. So from the field, we found that women are more equally involved in decision making, where various decisions related to benefit sharings, management activities, planned activities are discussed, and also more equally involved in management activities. And a good example is the forestry patrol, and I think the CO can also provide more evidence about this. They are supposed to provide reports to MCDI about who are involved in the forest patrol in the CBFM villages. So equal number of men and women are involved, for instance, in the forestry patrol, which was not the case in the non-CBFM villages. And there are also increased participation of women in the village natural resource committees. For instance, most of the villages have more than 50, in some cases we find that there are 50% of women in the village natural resource management committees. Yes, and there's also increased the participation of women, even though there's no equality in leadership position, as I stated earlier, but at least now women are holding position in the village natural resource committee. So this is, shows that it's an improvement in the gender participation in the conservation activities. Thank you.
Right. We have a minute for the recommendations. Thank you, Meti. Look, there are 6 recommendations that we put together for you, and you can see them at the back of the policy brief, which is in front of you on the desks. There are 3 which pertain to economic aspects and 3 which pertain to more government aspects. We think there's room for policies which can encourage businesses along the value chain, and that the government and other actors would need to promote the economic incentives and support the community-based enterprises which could provide that added value at the village level. And we have to recognize that a particular challenge for policymakers is that changing crop prices could mean that simply the risk of increased deforestation. One of the people who is attending virtually, Esteban Cubera, can testify to that, because he was conducting research in one of these areas in order to explore the benefits of carbon payments to local villages. What happened was that the sesame seed price increased enormously, and it swamped entirely any effect of carbon payments. The benefits from sesame dwarfed those of carbon payments, which made studying the impact of carbon payments much harder. We've also got 3 recommendations which pertain to governance arrangements. Elite capture is a continual problem, and mechanisms need to be devised which make it harder for elites to succeed in their attempt to capture. As Pili has reminded us, and we have found that that gender equality needs to be supported at a variety of levels and in all sorts of activities within community-based forest management, and that and this derives from Ellen Rostrom's work on natural resource management. We need a strong external supporting environment, that the government will need to be able to ensure that other actors, locally and internationally, are attracted to support forest conservation projects. As Nexus is all about, the partnerships are crucial to understanding the sustainability outcomes. Thank you very much for listening, folks. I believe the floor is open now for discussion.
Thank you, Dan and Pili. So we have half an hour for questions. And I don't know, are you monitoring the online, if there's any online questions? Or yeah, so let me know, Stefano, if there are any questions from the people online. And otherwise, yes, the floor is open. Any comments, feedback, questions? Yes? Okay, we'll start with you since you have the microphone.
Yeah, mine is a comment. I think it's a lovely policy brief which looks in terms of the within the forest sector. Maybe it is missing the other sectors, as I mentioned. I think my comment or my advice, we need to use maybe the current jargon words which are being promoted now. So maybe in the place of income generating activities, if we can use the words forest-based enterprises, at least it complies even other other terminology which are current being used. On the last recommendation, that is government should create a conducive environment and the policies I think that is doing. I think what is lacking is to scale up the CBFM, because already we know the model, it works. I think the investment which is lacking is the scaling up, so that you could tackle the issue of non-CBFM forest and village land. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you have a microphone?
Hello. Okay, mine is just a bit of recommendation. I would like to see, because most of these CBFM are found in the local government, but we don't see any recommendation that put the local government into task. Each year, local governments have the so-called district development plan. We don't see them, CBFM, featuring into their district development plan. So if it could be mandatory that maybe the district include the CBFM in their development plan, I think we could, the issue of scaling up CBFM, I think, will be taken care of. And the issue of library, I think there's one issue that we do. We always talk about charcoal, timber, but there's another issue of traditional medicine. I think there's a lot of money that is being generated through that business. I don't know to what extent studies have been conducted to find out to what extent they put more pressure on the forest, and also how much income is being generated from that business. And another issue is on land use planning, because if there are no land use planning is not there, most of the forest land will be encroached. So I think it has to be mandatory that in each village, I know it is costly, but okay, it has to be part and parcel in their plan that okay, each village must have a land use plan, so that forest land should not be encroached.
Take one more question and then we'll go to
My comment is related to number 3 in the policy recommendations. If local communities continue to lack economic benefits from forests, there could be a risk of increased deforestation. So at the moment, the way that it is framed, it's a statement of a potential outcome rather than a recommendation of how to deal with that potential outcome. So my suggestion would be just to sort of reframe the wording so there is a recommendation in there.
Okay, thank you. So a very concrete comment there. Pili and Dan, do you want to respond to the questions before we move on to the next round of comments and questions?
Thank you very much for the comments that have been raised, and most of them are the comments that we are taking on board, and you can include them in our discussion and improve the policy brief. I've seen that there is just a recommendation number 3. We will work on it, but if you see the recommendation number 2, it is mostly talk about the providing economic incentives so that it can also be part of it. So if we provide more economic incentive to the local community, it seems that they will have an alternative kind of activities to focus on and not to engage in encroaching the forest. Yeah. So we can improve it and we can combine it with the second recommendation.
Could you go up one slide to see this third?
Yeah.
I think your point's well taken. But it's not a recommendation; it's an observation. Would it be appropriate to recommend? Do you think that we ask that responsible bodies try to find out specifically what the costs are of not letting forests, to try to get a better grasp of the risk of financial danger? Would that be I'm asking yourself, but also the room more generally, would that be a better way of turning an observation into a recommendation?
Yeah, I think so. because the message is there, isn't it, about deforestation and the relationship with more economic benefits from different crops. So I think the way that you're suggesting to reframe that the two options would be to reframe that one as you just suggested, or I think Pili suggested to combine it with number 2, but I think they are slightly different, so I think there would be a benefit in reframing it as you've just suggested.
Thanks, colleagues. I think these policy briefs are great, but I think just in terms of looking forward, because you're asking for how to develop them, I think the key messages that you're trying to deliver is like you want your research feedback to go to the communities. So you really want to have that kind of longer messages going there. So the challenge is really how do you get these messages targeting communities right, and those messages targeting policymakers right. And that has two implications. You have to rewrite policy brief. If you are targeting policymakers, it will be too sharp. It will have to start with policy pointers. This is like 1, 2, 3. What is the message from this policy brief? Brief context with small headings, 3, 4 pages. And I think I sent email to you guys, the PIs, on really what policy briefs actually means. And this one, I have to confess, these are animals that we academics have never really touched. And at least I have some background on a policy and being exposed and writing these policy briefs. So that's the challenge that you make. And then you actually put yourself on a fire when you say avoid elite capture. What do you mean and how do you avoid it as in the recommendation? But I think I have one idea. In Tanzania, when it comes to natural resource management and governance, the most critical recommendation that we academicians and everyone else omit is active citizenship. And this is all about people understanding their rights and their responsibilities and being able to take office bearable into account. But it's a very complicated one, but is a most useful one. In areas where NGOs have been responsible in building that agency of local communities, communities have demanded their rights. They have got tangible benefits from natural resources, including forestry and wildlife. So it's something that we have to look at. I have no direct answer, but I need to evoke that discussion. Thank you.
If I could respond to that, Sule, I need to look at you at the same time as I talk. Your points are well taken and well made, but they prompt two thoughts. First of all, is active citizenship a policy recommendation? And secondly, is it a policy recommendation that preceded the research?
Can I just add something to that? Thanks, Sule, for bringing that up. One of the questions that every time I present in a conference abroad, I get asked and never got a very clear answer is, what are these people doing to defend their rights? Are there social movements? Are there any active resistance of any sort? And I realized actually we don't have local resistance which is active. People could be resisting, but in very passive way. This is different from what we hear from Latin America, even South Africa and other countries, where communities can really stand and put the government to task. So this is perhaps, yes, Sule, I completely agree with you that we lack engagement with this aspect of citizen participation, active participation.
With the permission of the chair, I think, because this is a kind of debate, and please allow me, and this is, I think is a part of that scholar activist spirit that we are building. In fact, if you go to Ngorongoro, that active citizenship exists. But it's on what I can call in silos, and it's not well documented. And as I said, it's a result of a political and social transformation that takes time, and it's the investment of the community themselves. If you go to Ngorongoro, there are many lawyers, graduates sitting in their district defending the people's land rights. And it has to do with a lot of political and policy changes. It's over time that has created this one. And if you have to go 20 years to kill one, I will assure you, you will have a different views on how this happened. So it's something that we couldn't research, but I think it's something that coming up from this kind of discussion. Asante.
Thank you so much. We have a comment here, and then here. So let's. Oh, you just had a. Okay, just additional.
Yeah, not to jump in. I'm just following the chat online, and so there is a comment by Eugenie Bluestein, who's going to be a discussant in the wildlife sector after, who says this is a central aspect. Thanks for bringing it up, Sule and Noah, referring to the social movement. And Esteve Corbera is also going to be a discussant tomorrow, is also online. And he says, as regards social movements, to look for inspiration at www.ejatlas.org.
Environmental Justice Atlas.
Yeah, Environmental Justice Atlas. Okay. The website is ejatlas.com. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. So thanks for the policy brief, and I have two comments. One is on policy recommendation number 4. I think also it relates to what Sule just pointed out about Dan shooting herself in the foot by talking about the elite capture. I think for a policy recommendation, I think it has to be sort of concrete, as Sule pointed out. I would just provide one example on how this elite capture actually happens on the ground in CBFM schemes. One of the mechanisms is through the village natural resource election and leadership. That's where you have processes that support elite capture. But when it comes to CBFM guidelines, they are very silent on how to administer and govern village natural resource election and leadership. Because it's the members of the village natural resource committee who themselves sit and they elect the leadership themselves. So it is quite easier to have sort of facilitation of this elite capture. So I think one of the areas would as a policy recommendation, you would look on how you can suggest such changes in the CBFM guideline, because it is silent on that. So that could be one of the mechanisms to have concrete recommendation for that aspect. But also on gender equality, going back to the morning's discussion, also you have to reflect on how could this happen in practice, because the CBFM guidelines talk about 30%, particularly for leadership. It talks about 30% of the leaders or the members of this village natural resource committee are supposed to be women. But in most of the villages that have done research, we find women are not ready, So, but you have already a mechanism that supports sort of a gender equality. So, I think it also has to be sort of concrete on this. And also just to finish on the social movement thing, I think we all know that in the past we had social movements like the Maji War and all that. So we need to think what happened, because nowadays we don't have such kind of movements. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very good policy brief. Maybe I have comments. You don't need to answer the comments. One is there are a lot of challenges that we are given in the morning on the forest related to marketing. And some of them, I don't see them in the policy recommendations. So this could be brought in there. For example, the lack of markets, for example, the village land forest reserve, they don't sell a lot. So those things should come in the policy brief somewhere in the recommendation. But there are some recommendations, for example, on implementing gender-related policies. To me, I see that one is a bit general. What are these specific things that you need in relation to gender that you need to change or need to be implemented? Maybe that can be explained a little bit well. But another thing is, there is one recommendation on policy. Forest policy should encourage more equitable business along the forest supply chain. I think this is a little bit difficult because to change the policy it requires a lot of maybe research-based studies. But even the forest policy itself is encouraging a value chain addition. For example, the producers, they need to do something to refine their product. To get more prices, etc. And through that, they can get a lot of benefits. So my view is maybe to encourage the mindset changes so that they don't sell the raw things. Maybe they produce more refined products or change to furniture and the other semi-final products. There was another one on, I didn't follow very well the title because the policy briefs should have a very attractive title, but I didn't follow very well. Maybe that should be considered. But there are a lot of things that you needed to present in the policy brief. One was forest condition, governance, livelihood, and gender equity. All these are, if you want to go to the detail, I'm sharing this comment with the same comment that was provided by Sule, that if you want to go to detail to this, it will be a very huge policy brief. So maybe you can split and maybe have 2 or 3 policy briefs, because I understand from the idea of policy brief normally is one idea, one policy brief. So you can have as many policy briefs as possible. There is one, the last one, on changing crop prices. You said that crop prices, maybe the increase of crop sizes lead to deforestation. I agree with that one. But why? What kind of policy do you want to bring? Recommendation you want to bring? Is it that we need now to make forest products more, maybe value, have very high value, so that maybe you harvest very little, but you get a lot of money from that? So, because there's no way we can change the other side, the agriculture sector, not to increase their crops prices, which affect indirectly our forests in terms of deforestation. So my view is, maybe what can we do in forests? Maybe that some recommendation that we point to the government, but there are some recommendation we have to point to the local communities themselves, so that we make huge changes in the forest sector itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to let you know online that now we can actually see you, so no pressure, but if you want to put on your videos, you would be part of the room now. So lots of feedback and comments. I don't know if you want to, should we take one more and then we'll, yes, opportunity?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to come back to the gender issue. And I think from the question I asked in the morning and now, Matthew, again, you said women are not ready. But one thing that I should also point out there was the supervisor of Pili, and reading through the thesis, it seems as if there are discourses that are constructing men's and women's works. And unfortunately, the women are also accepting them. And so it's a construction that is happening in their everyday interaction in lives. And so when I think of recommendations, I don't know the structure of MCDI or other NGOs that are working there, but I was thinking maybe a gender expert who will get into this, discourses in the way people live. I don't know if it's a psychologist or who can help the women understand that the constructions are actually marginalizing them. So I think probably that can be one of the concrete recommendations of making sure that they have a gender expert who knows how to deal with these issues day in day. Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of different inputs here. I don't know if you want to comment on any of them, and then we can have one last view round.
Comments that have been raised, and we are taking some on board. For instance, there is a comment that our policy brief contains many aspects of forest, the issue of gender, and we agree on that. And maybe I can develop the other policy briefs that mainly focus on the gender issue, so we can have a separate policy brief on that too. Yeah.
That's what I heard too, is that we currently have policy briefs which are separated by resource, but we could do one on gender and natural resources. We could do one on gender and natural resources, and there's no need to split them up in this way. I think, Abdullah, we may need to talk to you about how to bring in marketing into the recommendations, because I suspect you may have some specific ideas as to how to do that. Likewise, Bulki, I'd love to talk to you about precisely how to phrase the recommendations on elite capture, because your point is a good one. Avoiding elite capture is not a recommendation; it's a dream, it's a wish. But specifying those guidelines and how they might apply to the election and monitoring of village natural resource committees, I think, would be a really effective way of trying to express what we're trying to do. So again, I'd love to come back to you on that one. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have 5 minutes left, so we have time for just a few more questions, brief though, and final round of responses. You had a question?
Thank you. I just have a brief comment about the gender aspect, and I think we just need to be careful not to homogenize women as a group. There's a lot of diversity within this group of people that we always talk about women's needs and women's interests, and we've heard in the room today that there are some women that want to get involved in harvesting and they feel that they have the capacity to do that. And we've also heard from other participants to say that today, suggesting that some women aren't ready. And my own personal experience of working with women with women fish workers is I've also interacted with women who say that they are comfortable for men to lead certain aspects. And so I just think we just need to be very cautious that we're not trying to impose what we as outsiders of the community think that women want or have capacity for, or their interests or their values. Women themselves are not a homogenous group. So that's just a kind of cautionary note.
I also agree on your comments that you have provided, and even during the feedback we found this too, because variation also among women themselves, because there are some women who are more experienced because they have been involved in the political issues. Some have been have got exposure outside the village, so even their participation in decision making differs. So I also concur with you that women are also not homogeneous group. There are variation and differences within a group, within women groups themselves. And some women even consider being in some leadership or membership in the village national resource committee is a burden to them, because they also have other responsibilities like home responsibility. So they consider being in a village national resource committee will add more responsibility to them. So I concur with your observation on it.
Yes, and Stefano, you want to add a few things from the online?
Yeah, there's a comment by Frankie Gruchisson, who is one of our discussants for the coastal resources, who is saying, indeed, gender relations are social contracts and would need construct and would need to be addressed by working with women and men. It is not just about addressing women's barriers.
Thank you very much. There's 2 minutes left, but since we're going straight to the next session, I think maybe we'll just round it off here. But thank you so much for all your really good feedback and comments and input. It's been really helpful. Thank you.
Let me copy it today when you folder an exercise.
While we wait for the slide to come up, I would like to briefly thank our two discussants for the next session. Frauke Krujissen, who's a KIT, and Fiona Noonan, who's a professor at the University of Birmingham. And they will tell us a bit more about their engagement in this sector when it's their turn. In the meanwhile, in a few seconds, we will have the presentation from the Coastal Resources Group, which is starting in a second. Thank you.
Hello. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the next session. Okay, my name is Katikiro. I'll be sharing this session, and we have two discussants who will be joining us virtually, and have to make sure if they are all available online. We have Frugen Cruisen. Perhaps if you are there, can you please turn on your mic and say, "I'm there"?
Hi, good morning. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have our next discussant. Her name is Fiona Noonan. Fiona, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We have all two discussants. And as I will say later on, we have 15 minutes for the discussions. And for the main presentation, we have 25 minutes. We'll try to stick to the time. Now, without undoing, let me welcome Dr. Putuna Kweka just to take the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to present on coastal resources. And this is not my own work, as you can see. We have other people we work together, Dr. Robert Katikiro, Professor Stefano Ponte, Dr. Rasul, and Dr. Faraja Namkesa, who is not here today, but she will join us tomorrow. She has some family issues to handle. Sorry, yeah, today she's online. Tomorrow she'll be physically. Thank you, Stefano. So we did our research on coastal resources, and by coastal resources, we mean, this is not the presentation. That's okay. We meant the fish, the mangroves, and the corals. In my presentation today, in our presentation, I'll talk about the introduction, which will cover the beginning of the study and the case studies and selection, the methodology, and then we'll get into the details of the key findings, then conclusion and recommendation. We studied two types of what we call collaborative governance initiatives, and by this we mean the marine parks, and our case study in Mtwara, or the southern regions, was the Mnazi Bay Ruvuma Estuary Marine Park, or we'll simply use MBREMP. And we also did a study on beach management units in 8 villages in also Mtwara rural districts. And our main question was, which of these initiatives work better in terms of sustainability outcomes? But we studied actors, their processes, and getting into the details of legitimacy and their sustainability outcomes. Our study site were 8 villages, and I hope I can point each of these. So we had 4 villages in Bremp, and 4 villages in BMU cases. So if you can see, this is the first village. I believe this is Namidondi, Msimbati, Maurunga, and then we have Kubiru. And we have somewhere here Msangamku and Namela, and Mgao and Kisiwa. Those were the 8 villages that we did our study. And we applied a number of methods, the key ones being key informants interviews, where we did key informants interview with a total of 133 members from BMUs and BREMP, and 15 focus group discussions, and a total of 354 households were involved in a survey. And this fieldwork was done between 2017 and 2018. We also had some additional methods such as oral histories, but we also did review some documents and observation. We made observation in some of the, for example, the fish landing sites. So those were additional methods to get some of the information that we couldn't get with these 3 main methods. I will now take you through the findings of our key findings of our study. One, we found out that issues of conservation preceded over commitment to livelihood support. And with this, we saw that although there was improved conservation knowledge, most people acknowledge that they understand what the initiatives are about. They are more on conservation, and they understand some of the conservation knowledge that they received through training. And especially the BMUs, they access a number of training from WWF. And there was also enhancement of enforcement of the rules. However, we found out that there was minimal effects on socioeconomic and livelihood outcomes. For example, a number of projects that were introduced by BREMP in the past, when it started, were either no longer operating or with only few members, and they were not doing well as they were planned. And we found out some of the changes or development that are seen on the community were actually attributed to other factors than the presence of the operation of the BMUs and BREMP. And these other factors include things like, for example, oil and gas, introduction of oil and gas, issues of, for example, in the case of use of cement rather than corals, is because of the presence of the cement industry, Dangote's cement industry. So these changes actually change the minds of the people rather than the knowledge that they received. This one is repeating, I think. Yeah, so some of the findings from the survey on how they perceive the improved conservation knowledge, as you can see from this figure, we tried to compare BREMP and BMUs on what they say again on the conservation knowledge or benefits. And you can see the blue one is for BMU. So comparatively, you will see that I have to point so you can see what I'm talking about. Where did I put my phone? So this one here, the long blue one on the, which is the BMU, conservation benefits. Those who perceive that they have received conservation benefits and conservation knowledge were more in the BMUs than in Bremp. So, as we said, the conservation benefits in general seem to be one of the benefits that is perceived by the community. But again, when you compare BMUs and Bremp, those villages in the BMUs and those in the marine park, you will see that more of those in BMUs perceive to have received conservation benefits. This is also another way of saying that they have seen the conservation benefits, but of course through enhancement or enforcement of the rules. And again, a comparison of BMUs and Bremp shows that, of course, this is none, but for example, loss of equipment is more in Bremp, injuries by law enforcement, social isolation, attacked by villagers, as a way of saying there is enforcement, but as you can see, all these kind of enforcement are kind of forced, not really complying. And we will see when we come to the end of our presentation on what we are recommending. So here we have some of those projects which were introduced. We visited, as I said, we also did observation. The fish ponds, which were supposed to have the communities plant fish and leave the pressure from the ocean. But the communities told us that it's very expensive to, first of all, farm, because they have to give them food, but at the same time they are not used to this kind of fish. So those were some of the challenges that we found. This was also a livelihood project for women, fish smoking, that was also not doing well, but at least it was still operating. The PIL project, which was also introduced by Bremp, we only found one person, so it was no longer a group project. So it's only one person who had passion on it. It's a good project, we think, but because it's not done in a large scale, and it has not yielded the results that it was supposed to yield. Another one is, I think this is a big one, on the poor performance on tourism, where the Ruvula Sea Safari is the only tourist hotel, but it's not really very good and not well maintained. But at the same time, we see here that there are supposed to be some fees which are charged for tourism. There are not many tourists that are going that direction. At the same time, the villagers or communities are keen to the income that is generated from this, even though it is very small. Okay. So I will now leave my colleague to talk about the legitimacy party, right? So, Rasul Karim.
Thank you, Dr. Kweka. Without further ado, I will take you through the study's key findings and then the conclusions we are drawing from the research as far as the coastal sites are concerned. And one of the key findings in our research is the issue of, which is coming up, is the issue of community dissatisfaction with the performance of the initiatives, both BMUs and BMUs and Marine Park. But here in this case, they are concerned with the performance of the leadership, and they have they find the restrictions and other regulations on fishing gears affect their ways of earning from fishing activities. You can see the sharp contrast between the two sustainability initiatives, BMUs and Bremp. Here we are interested in acceptability of the rules to access and use. Yeah? As Kweka said, the blue color represents BMUs and the other color represents Bremp. And why acceptability? We wanted to examine whether sustainability initiatives are perceived as just equal. Is it me? I think someone has an issue with me being here, maybe. So we argue that the higher the level of acceptability, it indicates a higher degree of legitimacy. And so most of the respondents we came across found access and use rules and rights to be acceptable. This is more so in BMUs villages than in BREM villages. This is owing to imposition of new restrictions on fishing gear by the Marine Park, which was not accompanied by the successful facilitation of alternative livelihood activities. Let me move. Now, in the previous slide, you see very acceptable and acceptable. But in this one, you only have fair and unfair. You ask us why. I think this one quicker we combine the two, very fair and fair, to be in the fair, and very unfair and unfair too. That's the reason. But there is the figure is showing you very sharp contrast between findings from the BMUs and BREM. Okay, it's very fair in the BMUs, but very unfair. They are found to be very unfair in the BREM. And parts of the communities also point out specific rules which are perceived to be unfair. I'm mentioning a few due to the interest of time. Villages held that restrictions on the use of certain fishing gear, such as small mesh nets, the beach signs, is one of the unfair rules. Also, the other thing is zoning of fishing areas to be unfair. Other rules considered to be unfair are restriction on harvesting mangroves and on selling if you want to dispose personal plots without a special permit from the Marine Park. They found this be very unfair to them. In sum, what are we saying in this, from this research in our side? Even if rules are perceived to be clear, fair, and acceptable by the majority of the respondents, the local communities, many people hold reservations on how they are enforced or how their rights to access and use are considered or disregarded. They may be acceptable, but how are they enforced? Next, performance. Perceptions of the local communities on performance, the level of happiness. Whether communities perceive the leadership of sustainability initiatives is performing per expectation. And the results of the household survey are not especially encouraging on this aspect. BMU sites are not worth as local residents credit them. They credit the BMUs for awareness raising campaigns against destructive fishing practices. They know these are destructive fishing practices, and they attribute the dropping down of these practices due to BMUs raising awareness campaigns. But you can allow me quickly to mention the top reasons for being unhappy. Why are they unhappy? The two top reasons. One, lack of involvement, including lack of regular interactions with communities, and top-down imposition of decisions. Top-down imposition of decisions. That's the topmost, lack of involvement. The second one is poor performance of this initiative, both BMUs and MPs, Marine Park, indicated by lack of commitment, non-fulfillment of responsibilities, and low pace in taking and implementing decisions. When you go to the Professor Noe's sites, if there are attacks on by the wild animals, the slow pace in responding to those attacks made people unhappy. But in the coastal areas, this was also came up. The second, the other thing which was found cited as unfair was unfair treatment in applying rules. Okay, this did not impress most of the respondents, most of the communities. Consistency in applying the same rules. If you apply the rule to Dan, you should also apply to Ruth. Yeah? Sorry, I've picked you because you're facing me. Mm-hmm. Let me, because of time, let me now go. Oh, you have a picture showing the beach design net. We are very careful not to show the faces, but we are there. This is our own photo. We don't need to say courtesy of who. It's our own photo. It was continuing during time of field work. I don't know the situation today. So maybe the resistance may not be the right expression, but it still continue what we are saying. Yeah? Okay. We are drawing at least for now 3 main conclusions. One is destructive fishing, as alluded earlier by Dr. Kweka. This was not due to the sustainability initiatives, the BAMUs, and it was due to external forces. It was due to the pressure coming from the central government, the task force which was set up. Okay, so we are saying this is likely to resurface because it was not a homegrown. It was not entrenched in the communities. Second, both BAMUs and BREMP recorded unremarkable, let me put it that, lackluster performance in terms of livelihood and ecological outcomes, and the limited local communities' participation, and also you have the issue of duplication of the specific structures. You have the VEX fighting with the village executive environmental committees fighting with the BMUs, etc. Lastly, the study has identified communities' expectations in these partnerships, which we think can inform any exercise we venture in to revise the existing management plans, which take close note of their expectations. What do they expect? I think that's it. Thank you so much for listening to me. Mr. Chair.
Many thanks the 2 presenters from the Coastal Group, and many thanks also for saving time. You reserved the 5 minutes, which actually I'm going to shift these minutes to the 2 discussions. Now, I welcome the 2 discussions, for which I will be giving them 8 minutes each, and I would love to start with Froge Krugen. Please, if you are there, you are welcome. And yes, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Froge Kruijsen. I know it's always a difficult one to pronounce in any language besides Dutch. So I work for KIT, Royal Tropical Institute in the Netherlands. And for the past 10 years, I've been involved in aquaculture and fisheries research, first working for World Fish in Malaysia, and now since 5 years at KIT. And I've been really working from a perspective of poverty reduction, value chain development, food security, and social inclusion. So my commentary today really looks at this chapter from this perspective. Now, I must apologize because I just was part of the Forestry policy brief session, which I really enjoyed, and I realized that perhaps some of my comments are actually more suitable for the policy brief session on the coastal resources that follows after this. Nonetheless, I'll make them because those are the ones that I have prepared, and then maybe they are still useful for the next session. So thank you so much for the opportunity to look at the entire book actually and the chapter, and I really want to compliment you all on this project and completing this book despite the challenges of COVID, because I'm sure it must have been difficult with an international team working together remotely and travel being restricted. And because I had the chance to look at the entire book, I just want to say that I very much appreciated also the methodological approach of the project and the combination of quantitative and qualitative methods. And I really enjoyed the accounts that was there about the insights that different researchers had along the way about how to use qualitative data and the appreciation of that, and the description of your collaborative process of joint analysis. To get into the Postal Research chapter, I also very much enjoyed reading that, especially the detailed accounts and the increased understanding that it provided of the development of fisheries management in Tanzania and the two forms of partnerships and how these developed over time, and in particular, of course, the challenges they faced. Although I must admit that I was also a little disheartened by your analysis of the limited success of both the marine parks and the BMUs. So my comments really relate to, in a way, to the poor outcomes of this performance, and perhaps the legitimacy and the acceptance of the rules that you refer to. In particular, perhaps the analysis around it, because this was one of the things that I had perhaps hoped that the chapter would go into a little bit further. It's because you give a very interesting account of the differences between the marine parks and the BMUs, and you present the different perceptions of fairness and acceptance of rules. But I guess in both cases, it's the case that for people it's impossible to think about conservation when your children go to bed hungry. So it would have been interesting to understand a little bit better why why the outcomes were as they were. And in the presentation, what I really liked that doesn't come out so much in the chapter is this account of the different livelihood options that were introduced. And of course there it was clear that there was a limited success basically of all of these options. And I think what would have been nice is to have a little bit of a deeper understanding of why these different options failed. And maybe that's also linked to the research question as you present them in the beginning of the presentation. It really relates to which outcomes are there, but not why they are there. So, and I think that would be quite important to understand also when you go into the policy recommendations, because enterprise options and livelihoods options are not only in fisheries conservation, but also in the other resources, are proposed as a means to really counter livelihood declines as a result of regulating access to fishing areas, or as a means to diversify away from dependence on the fishery. And it's actually not just in the case of Tanzania, but in many cases that these options don't work out. So I think that it would have been very important for policymakers and conservation NGOs to really understand why this failed and how this then links back to the governance of fisheries resources and the environmental outcomes as a result. So linking back to the legitimacy and acceptance. So because of all the different reasons that are given, at least there need to be mutual livelihood outcomes for people to accept the new rules, and hopefully they are a bit better off in the long term. So it would also incentivize, of course, sticking to the rules if positive livelihood outcomes are achieved, and it could mean that they could diversify away from the fisheries and having that as their first source of livelihoods. So that I think would have been a very nice addition if there was a little bit more understanding of why all these different options failed, and what could be done by policymakers and conservation NGOs to improve that. So in the second observation that I have around it, and this really links and maybe replicates a little bit the discussion that was just in the Forestry session, which is really about how people are represented and can participate in fisheries management. And in the chapter, you have an interesting account about, for example, poor electoral processes in the BMUs because of lack of quorum in the meetings. And this really relates to that discussion of, elite capture and gender equity that that was just in the Forestry policy session. So this really points to this wider issue of how different kinds of people, and that point was also nicely made already, not just men and women, but also the young and the old, those that are more well off, those that are poor, the migrants in a community, or people from a minority religion or ethnic group, are really able to participate in fisheries management, and that has, of course, these different levels. So can they attend? Can they understand what's being discussed? Do they feel free to speak up? Do they feel that when they speak up, they are being heard? And lastly, do they feel that their opinions are taken into account when decisions are being made in such committees? So I think that is a second point that I think could have been elaborated perhaps a bit more, is that why was that quorum there, not there, for example? Why did people not feel that it was interesting or useful for them to attend such meetings, and differentiate between different types of people? And so I was very interested in the discussion on gender equity in the earlier session, and at KIT we've also looked at community-based fisheries management, for example, in Southeast Sulawesi in Indonesia, really looking at a gender lens on that, and how to ensure that women can participate in such processes and are part of the management committees of community-based resource management or fisheries resource management groups. And it's really about addressing all these different barriers that different kinds of people have. So ranging from very practical, for example, I don't have anyone to take care of my children, so I cannot attend this meeting, to much more structural, which gets into the point that I made in the chat earlier about these structural barriers that relate to relations between men and women, and in particular the structures around social and gender norms. So, for example, the norms around who knows about the fisheries, who is the fisherman, who has an interest in it. So, and also at the same time, attitudes around who should speak up during such meetings, who is a natural leader, and on the other hand, the confidence of women to be able to do that. And again, not just of women, but also of different types of men, for example. So, and I think that if you don't look at those barriers and don't address those, then legitimacy in the eyes of the community may never be achieved, as it will only represent a small group of people. So, so I just want to reiterate that it was indeed, the point was made about women not being ready, but it's not just that, right? It's women not being ready maybe to speak up, not feeling confident, but it's also about the men not being ready for the women to be ready, if you know what I mean. So, I would like to leave you with those two observations in particular, and I think that will really support developing more concrete policy recommendations that really get into then how do you address legitimacy, how do you make sure that people feel represented, and how do you make sure that women can participate. Thank you very much.
Okay, many thanks for this very useful criticism. This actually, they are helping and broadening our understanding as we move toward the plenary session, where I think all of these 2 points will be captured because we have explained them very clearly. Now, may I use this time to bring to the front to Fiona. Welcome, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a discussant at this session. I've been following NEPSIS to some extent over the years, and I was very fascinated to see the research project, particularly in terms of taking different natural resource sectors at the same time, because I think that's quite unusual. People tend to focus on one natural resource sector and not bring in that comparative perspective, which I think is really important. But also, I think I thought the research question itself of sort of comparing different levels and experiences of complexity in natural resource governance was very interesting and novel. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for sharing the draft book manuscript, and thank you for the presentation this morning. Just to say a little bit about myself then, because that might sort of help with understanding where I'm coming from. As I was introduced, I'm a professor of environment and development in the International Development Department at the University of Birmingham. I come from a sort of development studies background and perspective, but my focus of my research is on renewable natural resource governance, particularly in land fisheries and particularly in East Africa. And so in relation to that, I should say as well that I came back to academia in 2008, having worked for some years in East Africa, for a couple of years in Uganda. It was quite a long time ago, I have to admit, 2003, 2004, working on several lakes on integrated lake management on a DFID-funded project. And a key part of that was to support the development and implementation of beach management units, not on Lake Victoria then, but on Lakes George and Choga in Uganda, and also supporting the development of an integrated lake management approach. Between 2005 and 2008, I worked on Lake Victoria on an EU-funded project. Some of you in Tanzania may be familiar with the implementation of a fisheries management plan project on Lake Victoria. And so I worked with LVFO and the Lake Victoria Fisheries Organisation on implementing the fisheries management plan. But my particular role there was, again, to support the implementation of co-management, which had already really started in the region. Now, as I say, I left in 2008, and the project finished a couple of years after that. And so I think your findings really seem very familiar to me. I've kept in touch with the region. I've conducted some research on Lake Victoria myself, and I've certainly found that it's a very mixed picture in terms of performance, about how the BMUs are working now and the sort of outcomes associated with them. So I think that sort of lack of ongoing support in many ways is a real problem for the system. I've also worked since I've been back in academia, worked on some research in Kenya and Zanzibar that's sort of relevant to this project as well, on the governance of mangrove forests and coastal ecosystems. So there's some sort of useful perspectives I've sort of gained from that as well, and I think are probably familiar to the context here about the very fragmented governance and very difficult to sort of integrate across sectors. So I do really appreciate the evidence and the analysis in the chapter and in the presentation, and as I say, it does all seem very familiar to me. But I think my comments are really going to focus on the chapter a bit more than the presentation. As I say, I really sort of did appreciate the evidence and analysis in it. But I felt that I would have appreciated a bit more explanation and reflection on how you understood simplicity and complexity in relation to the governance arrangements that you were focusing on. So you put forward that the marine park is considered a simple form of governance in the beach management unit system or the co-management system, a complex system of governance. And you do provide some evidence to support that in terms of the network figure and a table. But I think that still, and I know it's a little bit difficult because the comparative chapter on complexity comes after that in chapter 8 of the book. But still, in the chapter, I think you could reflect more and provide more evidence about the degree of simplicity and complexity, particularly in terms of sort of relationships between structures and systems. So I'm thinking of between BMUs and fishery staff, between other parts of government, between BMUs and the village committees. And I think there are some other sort of angles or dimensions of simplicity or complexity perhaps that you could consider there. And a further point that I felt was a bit unsure that why it wasn't a bit more in the chapter, was drawing more on some of the theories and concepts from chapter 1. I mean, chapter 1 is very rich in terms of the theoretical and conceptual perspectives considered. And again, I appreciate that a lot of the sort of analysis drawing on those concepts and theories and literatures come later in the comparative chapters, but I think there is scope to particularly think about power sharing and sort of power dynamics and the influence of politics and the political economy, the wider political economy, and how these influence the performance, the structures, the systems, the outcomes in the two different cases. I think in the chapter I would like to have seen a little bit more about how observation was used as a method, if that was possible, because I think it's a very interesting method to use in the context of analysing sort of governance and governance performance. And a couple of sort of points. One point from the presentation this morning, you talked quite a bit about communities being dissatisfied with the performance and with enforcement. And I wondered what communities did want to see in terms of enforcement. You did mention about sort of consistency, wanting to see consistency in enforcement. But I wondered if there was anything else, because it's such a challenge to work out how to be sort of participatory, how to enable livelihoods, but at the same time to sort of manage fish stocks sustainably. So I think I wondered if anything else came out of there. And I also wondered whether you had any thoughts about, if you were to conduct research that builds on this research project, what would you think you would focus on in the coastal context? Was there anything that came out you thought, well, this, you know, we'd really like to investigate this now? What sort of new research questions are emerging? And then finally, I just wanted to reflect from my own experience of research that I think that, you know, you've really focused on the sort of community level, and of course you have investigated and interviewed government officers, etc. as well. But I think this lack of integration into the wider system of fisheries and coastal resource management is a real problem. I think there's a sort of a disconnect between what they think is happening at the local level and what is, you know, what is the way that they manage these resources sort of more widely within the departments and ministries. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Fiona, and altogether many thanks for our two discussions. I will not put forward the main issues that they have raised because of the time, but what I will do is, like, I'm opening the floor for discussion. This is a plenary discussion, and this is open to everybody. For those who are connected online, please, you may raise up your hand, and perhaps our IT will help us to identify you, so that also you have an equal chance with other people who are sitting in this auditorium right now. Now, we start with a round of questions. We'll be taking some questions and then getting the reactions. Okay, we'll start with Dr. Narman. Welcome, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak my comments. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the very good work that you have done. I just want to put in my experience about the coastal resources. I've noticed that you've mentioned mangroves, you've mentioned coral reefs, but seagrass is not mentioned. And seagrass is also one of the most important ecosystems in the ocean. For example, we had a project which was called Interlinkages of Coastal Ecosystem. We look at the fish which come from the mangrove, then they go to the seagrass, and then they go out into the coral reefs. And it's very, very important. I think, Blandina, you did work on that, isn't it? And maybe she can comment more. But it's a very important, and it's always forgotten. Even in management issues, it's only corals and mangroves. But now there are projects which are starting to take into account, into consideration this. Another comment I'd like to mention is about livelihoods. I've noticed you've mentioned some like for example, the half-pile farming technique, which is done in Twara. Actually, that guy came to Zanzibar, and he was trained in Zanzibar. And I just want to say that among the most prominent or people who are producing a lot of pearls is that guy. The problem there is they have no market. So market is a very, very important issue. So what he does is he checks his resources and brings them to Zanzibar for sale, and we get more, that we are producing a lot, actually is coming from Mtwara. And also another thing is smoking and this aquaculture. Also, I think why it's not progressing is because of lack of markets. So I just want to highlight this, and later on I will highlight some points I had on the policy brief. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Narma. And may I ask those who are online, if possible, you can drop your questions on the chat room, and perhaps we'll try also to bring your questions in order so that we can capture also your presence. Yes, welcome.
Thank you so much. I think this is one of the interesting presentation. Two issues. One is in terms of, because this project is about sustainability, and we are talking of these coastal resources, fishery, and so on. But I expected to hear a little bit about oil and gas, gas activities taking place onshore currently, because I think Rasul mentioned about the restrictions, but not necessarily related to oil and gas. But for sure there are some restrictions related to this project, because fishermen or fish folks are not allowed to fish in some of the areas, and therefore they are restricted to do their activities, and this might have implications on sustainability, but also the livelihood of these communities. But I don't think this came out clearly. And as we are speaking, this huge project which is pushed by the government, the establishment of the LNG plant in Lindi to tap the gas from the offshore, it's likely to happen probably. And if it happens, it means it have more implication on these coastal resources and livelihood activities, especially fishing, because there'll be laying of pipelines, and therefore restrictions are likely to increase. So I thought that was one of the important issues, and probably it links to the last discussant who asked, what would you think if you were to do another research? Which area would you think of? And when Rasul was presenting, he talked about top-down imposition of decisions. I think that's quite common, and in the study that I just completed. By the way, I completed my PhD 2 months ago, and I was focusing on oil and gas, especially on local community participation in this sector. And one of the projects, for instance, which is taking place is this gas pipeline running from Mtwara to Dar es Salaam. And the communities, especially villages, are assigned responsibility to protect the pipelines. And they're getting paid anything between 250 to 450,000 for doing that activity. But when you ask as to how they were involved in terms of making decisions related to the payment and the whole process, they have no clear answer. They say this was kind of imposition. They say wenyewe ndio waliamua. And when you say wenyewe, the owners of the pipelines are the ones who decided, who determined this amount. And when you say wenyewe, it means even there is lack of ownership of that project, because when you say wenyewe, it means local ownership is not there. And therefore, for me, I think it's common, and it's an issue that really need to be taken into consideration and see how it could be addressed.
Okay, many thanks. Yes, Stefan.
Thank you. I'm going to read up one of the questions from the chat. This is from Lisa Ritchie, a colleague at Copenhagen Business School, who's also involved with some of our members on a different project on everyday humanitarianism in Tanzania. And she says, Asanteni sana for your presentation on the coastal resource research. I have a question for my colleague, Dr. Kweka. I'm interested in hearing more about local perceptions of the tourist hotel, which you noted was rather unsuccessful in generating profits, but seems to be sparking resentment nonetheless. Given the strength of your mixed methodology, could you share some of the stories and ideas about these kind of conflicts? And I'm adding here because you also answered a little bit. There is BREMP and the hotel conflict, and there is BREMP and the local community conflict. So opportunity will be a chance for you to address some of that. I also wanted to, I'm abusing a little bit my position here, but I wanted to address at least two of the issues that Fiona raised. I was also doing research in Uganda in the mid-2000s, actually, on Lake Victoria fisheries, and came across your work. And so when we started working with BMUs, we knew already where to go when we want to have a real good check about whether we are getting these things right, not only in terms of the way it works, but also regionally in a comparison. So I'm really glad that you're part of this conversation today. I think that to be extremely honest with you, if we focus on the coastal resources case study, we probably wouldn't have kept the complexity distinction very strongly. Out of the three, and for those of you who are here tomorrow, you will get that more clearly. Out of the three resources, this was the one that was most difficult in terms of the methodology and the comparison. Number one, because we didn't have a comparison site where there wasn't any management, because by definition and policy, all coastal areas need to have a BMU. And we started a project saying, oh, there's this area where they haven't started the BMUs yet, so we'll keep that as control sites. And by the time we got there, they had already started them. So we lost the control sites. And the BMUs were active, and then there was the BREMP area, and not only that, part of BREMP is also overlapping with one of the BMUs, so it's really messy here. But there is a sense that it was helpful to compare rather than lumping them together, because the BREMP is more top-down, and it is more kind of directed by central government through the various agencies. And BMUs do have many more ACO groups involved. And then the social network complexity is also different, and Lasse, who's also online here, will discuss those tomorrow. So, so if we were just to do the coastal resources, probably we would have framed it right, slightly differently. But I think we still have some interesting comparisons that will come out across the three resources as we'll discuss tomorrow. The second point you made is yes, I would have loved for everyone to draw from the same theories. We are a group of 16 authors in an edited book. We had to make peace with what people found more interesting in relation to their chapter. So guilty as charged, but it's a pretty obvious, well, not an obvious, but it's a good point that you make here. The third point on participant observation, so the PhD that finished that is part of this group is Faraja Namkesa. She's online, but she has a very small baby, so I don't want to have her to be in a difficult situation now. But I do know that she spent a lot of time on the beach, essentially observing operations in terms of the landing of fish, the selling of fish, the local market, who got, how the local payments and levies were working, the interactions at the local level, the meetings in the BMUs that she was able to observe. So a very rich set of observations. We could only draw partially in the book from that, but if you're interested, her PhD has got a trove of really good material that didn't find its way into the book. I spoke too long, I'm sorry, I'm going to stop now.
Okay, thank you. Now, before I take a round of questions again, I want to allow the members of the team, and also by the virtue of my position as a moderator, to ask also Jennifer from BREMP perhaps to respond a bit, just to give us a state of what on what is going on regarding oil and gas. But before that, may I ask the convener if it would be possible to get extra 10 minutes so that we squeeze in the lunch time. Okay, then that is good. Please, may I welcome the members of the coastal team to respond. Please be precise and brief.
Thank you. I think we'll take some of the comments, so if I won't mention it here, it means we have heard them and we are taking them. Some of them have been addressed by Professor Ponte. I want to talk about 2 or 3 issues. One was on the projects. I think it was from Jidawi, if I remember. It was why the projects did not do well. It was from one of the commenter. I think it's the issue. One of the things that we found is that lack of ownership of these projects as well. Maybe there was poor preparation of the communities. For example, when we look at the history of how it was established, we found out that it was in a rush. Of course, NGOs were used to create awareness to the community, but most of these projects, the way they were introduced, people are not very well involved. And thank you for bringing the issue of markets, because it didn't really come into the discussion when we talked to the communities, because by the time we were doing the study, most of these projects were not doing well. As you can see, when we visited the fish farming, there was nobody even to explain to us, but only leaders who took us there. And one of the comments that came from some of the officers that we talked to were, for example, on the chicken project that we couldn't even see it, was that they even regarded the chicken to be, they used the word kuku wa mradi. I think at some point we had that, which was really, they never owned that. And there was also, I think, a cattle keeping project, and they're not even taking the milk, they just keep the cattle and sell for meat. So there are many things that were not culturally really accepted as livelihood in the area which were introduced, and I think because probably of lack of good preparation. On the sea grass, I think that probably could go into the next project, as we've been asked. None of us is an expert, especially with an exception of Professor Dr. Katikiro, not really expert on the sea from the science point of view, but social sciences. So we are looking mainly on the structures and how they affect the sustainability outcomes in terms of social and ecological from the perception of the community. So that's what we looked at. I think the oil and gas was one of the things that we had from one of our PhD students, but we dropped because it was too much, but it doesn't mean that we didn't deal with that. We asked about number of actors, and some of the actors were the oil and gas companies, and we interviewed them. And I think the question that was asked online from Lisa, there are issues between BREMP Oil and Gas, which is the Ministry of Energy anyway, and then, of course, local tourists in BREMP. So those are issues that we've outlined in some of the reports that are actually in the on website and some of our papers. Yes, so I can say that, and I'll let Rasul answer on the legitimate question.
Thank you so much, all the contributors, including the 2 discussants, Froje and Fiona, for your insights and questions. And as put by Ponte, in some of them is guilty as charged, but we will really benefit from the questions we raise. For example, one of the questions that we are grappling with currently is the one raised by Froje, why we found the outcomes as they were. Why are they there? And from my point of view, from my background and the issue we have been dealing with, why is participation in these sustainability initiatives low? Why is it low in village meetings? Why is it low? And some of the questions, some of the responses which were coming more from the FGDs, focus group discussions and some of the face-to-face interviews is that the villagers see no more value in attending these village meetings. It's business as usual. They are not getting the answers that are convincing. No value. And because I had an opportunity to look at the three sectors as far as the participation in village meeting is concerned, in forestry, in wildlife, and coastal, you find attendance varies according to the agenda of the meeting. There's more attendance in meetings where the discussion is on income and expenditure. They are more interested. They attend. Not in big numbers, but compared to the others. So it depends on the meeting. And the other thing is, Fiona, you raised that the findings seem to be very familiar to you. Yes, it's good. But the idea of doing research sometimes is not so much to unravel new insights. Sometimes it's to confirm what is out there. So if, our findings may not be very, very different from what others have done, but at least we are confirming some of the insights that have been raised by others. You have a question on, apart from the question of unsatisfaction with these sustainability initiatives. So apart from discontent on the decision-making processes, reservations on degree of engagement and collaboration, or we also found out is the question of they are unsatisfied because of unfulfilled promises. They were given promises at the beginning when BREMP was starting, when these are the issues, or we will give you new boats so that you can be able to go to fishing in deep waters. This did not materialize, so they are unsatisfied. The other serious issue was lack of feedback on revenue generation and sharing. Okay, however small benefit is coming out of these initiatives, they want to get feedback. Issues of transparency and accountability. Thank you so much.
Okay, many things. As I've said before, I give the time to Jennifer, who is a practitioner, not a researcher, also to give that perspective, especially from BREMP.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said before, my name is Jennifer. I'm working with Mnazi Bay Ruvuma Estuary Marine Park, and I would like to respond in some issues. One is on oil and gas project here. You know, there is this project here taking place in our marine park here. But it was not that easy when it was started, because we are not happy as a marine protected area to have that big project within our area. But because it was an interest of the government, we had nothing to do with that. So the project started and implemented in our place. But what we are doing now is just to monitor the activities to make sure that the impact, negative impact of the project should be minimized according to our standards. So we are doing it in good cooperation with the gas companies. And we are doing it in a monthly basis. Every month we do this monitoring activity in the gas areas, some sensitive areas, like where the waste products are disposed. We will make some inspections and to see that there is no any harm in our ecosystems. And the second issue on conflict between marine park and hotel, I think you are referring the Ruvura Sea Safari Hotel, which is within the park. And that hotel was started before the marine park.
That we can't hear.
And pardon? And the main problem between us is that that owner of the hotel is not comfortable with the gate fee, which is within the marine park, and that gate is there following our act. It allows us to collect the entrance fee from that gate. But that owner is not comfortable with that gate. He's complaining that maybe he's not getting customers because of that gate which is posed in the marine park entrance. And we have nothing to do with that. We exempted him and the family of that owner not to pay the user fee, but the guests, they should pay. But also she's not comfortable with that. And we try to create awareness and discuss with her, but it's not that much cooperative. So we have nothing to do again, but continuing with the collection of user fee from that gate, because it's a law which gives us that power to collect user fee. And also I would like to respond on the relationship between a BMU and a VLC, or difference between the two. You know, in Marine Park area, we have these village liaison committees in each village. And currently we have 23 villages within the park. And our Act, number 29 of 1994, instructed the Marine Park to establish these village liaison committees in each village. But the roles and responsibility of VLC, it is more or less the same as BMU. So we have we were supposed to have 23 VLC in 23 villages, but some villages, they were not agreed to establish these VLCs, especially 4 villages in Naling Ward. I think some of those who participated in this research, they understand why. And about the livelihood activities, yeah, they are not performing well, but we tried when the park was starting. We supported some villages to implement these livelihood activities, including this pearl farming. We sent some people to Zanzibar to learn. There were about 24 people, but only one make it, but others were not interested to implement the project. But also we supported some fish smoking activities. We also facilitated people to establish projects like beekeeping and aquaculture. Like in one of the villages, Tangazo, there were big projects of beekeeping and fish farming. It went very well for the first 3 years, but later there was some conflict between the members and the project collapsed. But it was a very big project. Yeah, I think.
Many thanks, Jennifer. I think that's more than enough. Thank you very much. And may I take the next round of questions, very brief questions, only 2 questions.
Let me take this opportunity to thank the team and the presenters for the good job that they have done. I would like also to echo what Dr. Jidayo has said with regard to the interlinkages that exist between mangrove seagrasses and coral reefs. They actually depend on one another, and together they support fisheries, and there is a great need to manage them in totality and not as single habitats. So I think leaving out seagrasses in the study was maybe an oversight. And this is reflected also from the presentation. You could see that the local communities they were they wanted to use some of the destructive fishing gears, and especially the beach seines. So a beach seine cannot be operated in coral reefs, but can be operated over the seagrass beds, but it's very destructive. And we have seen one of the photos with very juvenile fishes, reflecting that they were collected actually from the seagrass beds. So I'm very sure if seagrasses were included as one of the habitats, then you could also get a bit of a different perspective. I was very much concerned with findings with regard to the marine park, the MBREMP, and I wanted to hear from the lens of the marine park, because the findings that have been presented, they reflected the perspective of the local communities. So I don't know if they do have results, but I would also like to see the reaction when they are doing the surveys, if the marine parks were included, and what were their responses for the different issues that were raised. And one more thing was one more thing with regard to oil and gas. I know that the oil and gas in Mtwara were discovered in the 1980s. So the establishment of the park actually came later. So I think that perspective should be taken correctly. And yeah, so I think having the findings from the lens of the marine park and the BMUs, what was the reaction of the BMUs people and the marine park should also be presented so that we get a clear picture. And when you do, you draw your recommendations, then they should not go against the laws, because even if the local communities support beach, they want to use beach seining, but that is one of the illegal fishing gear. So regardless of their preference, you cannot recommend that. Thank you.
Okay. Many things? Yes. Last question, please.
Yeah, okay. Let me take this opportunity to thank the presenter. In your presentation, you said that the tourism wasn't performing well. But how can we use the concept of blue flag initiative in promoting tourism in this area? Because Tanzania likely we have, I think, among the longest coastline in Africa. So the concept of blue flag initiative, how can it be applied in promoting the management and maintenance of our beaches, but at the same time maybe using it in promoting the tourism?
Okay, many things. Perhaps because time was not on our side, I will just ask my co-group members, if possible, if they like, just to have a 1 minute wipe up with all that has been asked, and those things which perhaps will remain burning, I guess we'll have time when we are doing it in the policy brief. Do you want to do it quick? Or Rasul?
Yes, I can. Thank you for the wonderful questions and comments. I think I just want to reply on whether Marine Park was involved in the survey. It was involved in the study, but not in the survey as such, but as key informant interview. I don't know if we will be exposing our respondents now, but yes, they were all actors. We interviewed all the actors which were found there. And maybe I should apologize. We should have put the table on who else among the institutions, all the way from Dar es Salaam, from the ministry to BREMP, and of course the office of the district office. I couldn't get the beach saying, you said we can't put there because it's not recommended. The use of beach saying nets. Did we say it should be used?
I think quicker that perhaps will come during the policy discussion. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. We can.
Okay, just the last vote of things.
especially on the seagrass. May I admit that it was not an oversight error, because even Blandina knows that seagrass is one of the ecosystems which are not well studied in our region, but this is opening for future research. As we are doing that work, we welcome and to open more projects for that. Now, many thanks everybody for your contribution. The time is over, but still we have another session. We'll be discussing the policy brief from the coastal, and I think some of these questions which have not been answered or questions or comments will come up. Thank you for your attention, thank you for your contribution, and let me give the chance to the floor manager for what is coming up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katikiro, and thank you for the discussion and contribution. Thank you for our discussions to our online. I hope you can still join us in an hour when we talk about the more directly about the policy issues. Thank you, Frauke. Thank you, Fiona, and everyone else. We reconvene in exactly an hour at 13:45 local time. And I'll see you all then. Thank you very much. We're going for lunch at least here. Thank you.